There's a man who, on paper, holds the single most powerful title in Iran. He commands the armed forces. He has final say over the Revolutionary Guard. He is, according to Iran's constitution, the highest religious and political authority in the entire country. And in the nearly 5 months since he was given that title, not one single person outside a tiny circle has confirmed seeing his face or hearing his voice in public. Not once. Not at his own father's funeral, an event that drew massive crowds and nearly every senior official in the Iranian government. His name is Mojtaba Khamenei, and he is, right now, the most powerful ghost in the Middle East. This is not a fringe conspiracy theory circulating on the internet. This is a genuine, unresolved question being asked openly by major international news organizations, by Israeli and American intelligence assessments, and, remarkably, by figures inside Iran's own government. Stay with me for the next 30 minutes, because I am going to walk you through exactly how this happened. What the competing theories inside Western and Israeli intelligence actually say about where he is and what condition he is in, why his own foreign minister has admitted he has never personally met the man he answers to, and why this vacuum at the top of Iran's government may be shaping this entire war more than anyone in Tehran wants to admit. Here's the detail that should stop you before we go any further. Iran's foreign minister, the man responsible for representing this government to the entire world, has publicly stated that he has never actually met Mojtaba Khamenei in person, and that only a small handful of people in the entire country have. Sit with that for a second. The chief diplomat of the Islamic Republic cannot confirm he has been in the same room as his own supreme leader. Let's break down exactly what we actually know, what remains genuinely uncertain, and why that uncertainty itself might be the most important fact in this entire story. Before I go further, here is where I am coming from on this. I've spent years around operational and strategic analysis, including how governments manage information during a leadership crisis in wartime, which is exactly the lens I am bringing to this story. Everything you are about to hear is drawn from confirmed reporting from multiple independent outlets, official Iranian statements, and on-record comments from intelligence and diplomatic sources. I will be clear with you about what is verified, what is credible but unconfirmed, and what is pure speculation dressed up as fact elsewhere online. Let's get into it. To understand how Iran ended up with an invisible supreme leader, you need the full sequence of what happened. On February 28th of this year, the United States and Israel launched the opening strikes of this war, and one of the very first targets hit was Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader of nearly 37 years. He was killed in that strike, along with, according to multiple reports, his son Mojtaba's own wife and mother. Mojtaba himself is believed to have been present and wounded in the same attack. Within about a week, under what multiple reports described as heavy pressure from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iran's Assembly of Experts, the clerical body constitutionally responsible for selecting a new supreme leader, announced Mojtaba Khamenei as his father's successor. He was 56 years old, a mid-ranking cleric with a rank actually below what Iran's constitution technically requires for the role, quickly and conveniently elevated in religious standing by state media in the lead-up to his appointment. Key political figures, the IRGC and the armed forces, pledged their backing almost immediately. Iran's president called it a new era of dignity and strength for the nation. And then Mojtaba Khamenei simply disappeared from public view, and he has not reappeared since. That appointment itself was not a quiet formality. The Assembly of Experts met for days, most of its members participating remotely, and reportedly delayed announcing its decision over specific fears that publicizing Khamenei's selection in advance could make him a target before he was even formally installed. Iran's constitution technically frowns on the ideas of hereditary succession, a son inheriting his father's exact position, and for years leading up to this moment, Ali Khamenei himself had reportedly told the assembly that his own son should be excluded from consideration as a potential successor. That instruction, according to multiple reports, was overridden once the Guard made its preference clear in the days following the assassination. One former Israeli official described the choice bluntly, framing it as a defiant signal from Iran's establishment. Continuity with the old order, delivered through the bloodline, whatever the constitutional discomfort with that choice might otherwise have been. I need to ask something of you before we go further into this, because a story this layered, involving competing intelligence assessments, unverifiable claims, and a government actively trying to manage its own narrative, deserves careful, ongoing tracking rather than a single headline glance. If you want the full breakdown as new details emerge, subscribe and turn on notifications now. I'm following every credible update on this as it happens. Now let's get into exactly what the world has and has not seen since that appointment, because the specifics here matter enormously. Since being named Supreme Leader in early March, Mojtaba Khamenei has communicated with the public exclusively through written statements released by Iranian state media, attributed to him but never delivered on camera, never on audio, never with his own physical presence. He has never shown his face or used his voice publicly since taking the role. That pattern held even through the moment you would expect any leader in his position to appear, no matter the risk, his own father's funeral. The marathon public mourning ceremonies for Ali Khamenei stretched across multiple days in July, drawing enormous crowds in Tehran and culminating in a burial ceremony in the holy city of Mashhad, attended by a who's who of senior Iranian officials, including the Speaker of Parliament and the country's Chief Justice. Social media users combed through every image and video from those ceremonies, looking for any confirmed glimpse of the new Supreme Leader. There was none. No announced plans for him to appear were ever released, though officials note that, given legitimate security concerns, any decision for him to appear likely would not have been announced in advance regardless. Think about the symbolic weight of that absence for a moment. In nearly every political and religious culture on earth, a son burying his father is one of the most basic, universally expected acts of public duty a leader can perform. And, in Iran's specific religious and political context, that act carries even more institutional weight given the office Mojtaba now holds. The ceremonies themselves were treated as a moment of national significance, so central that Tehran reportedly paused active diplomacy with the United States around the funeral dates entirely, out of respect for the mourning period. Every senior figure in Iran's government who could plausibly appear did. The one person whose presence would have carried the most symbolic and political weight of all was the one person conspicuously, unmistakably absent. Here's where the story splits into genuinely competing explanations, and I want to walk through each one honestly, because no single narrative here has been independently confirmed. The first and most straightforward explanation is injury. Israeli and Western intelligence sources have assessed that Mojtaba may have sustained serious wounds in the same strike that killed his father, with some reporting specifically raising the possibility of severe facial burns. If true, that alone could explain both the total absence from cameras and the exclusively written communication, a leader unable or unwilling to be seen in his current physical condition. There were even reports circulating earlier this year that he had been left unconscious after the strike, and that preparations were reportedly being made for his own burial alongside his father, reports that were never confirmed, and that were effectively contradicted by the continued release of statements in his name in the months since. That contradiction itself is part of what makes this story so difficult to pin down. Even the most extreme version of the injury theory has not been definitively ruled in or ruled out by anything resembling hard, independently verified evidence. The second explanation is pure security. Israel's military stated explicitly before the appointment was even finalized that it would pursue any successor to Khamenei, and Israeli officials have separately said their strategic goal includes destabilizing the regime itself. Under that kind of direct, publicly stated threat, disappearing from view and having every public appearance planned in total secrecy is simply standard survival practice for a wartime head of state, whatever his physical condition might be. His own father, during a previous, shorter round of conflict with Israel, similarly retreated into near total seclusion for a period, communicating primarily through recorded video statements rather than live public appearances, so there is at least some precedent within this exact family and this exact office for extreme caution during active hostilities. The difference this time is duration and completeness. The father eventually did reappear, waving to a crowd at a mosque near his residence. The son, nearly 5 months in, has done nothing comparable. The third explanation is the one that should genuinely unsettle you, because it does not just raise questions about Mojtaba Khamenei's health. It raises questions about who is actually running Iran right now. A report that surfaced on the Saudi channel Al Hadath, citing Israeli officials, claimed that Mojtaba Khamenei is not even inside Iran, and that the written statements released in his name are actually being drafted by senior Revolutionary Guard officials, specifically naming IRGC Commander Ahmad Vahidi as one of the people involved in producing that messaging. According to that same reporting, the goal of maintaining this arrangement is to project an image of governmental stability and complete control to both the Iranian public and to the outside world, while the actual center of decision-making sits somewhere else entirely, inside the Revolutionary Guard's own command structure. Separate reporting has floated the possibility that Khamenei may have fled to Russia entirely, a country with a documented track record of providing safe harbor to allied hardline leaders under pressure, and one that maintains a close enough strategic relationship with Tehran that quietly hosting its supreme leader, if that is in fact what happened, would not be entirely out of character. None of these three explanations, injury, security-driven concealment, or an IRGC-managed facade with the real leader physically removed from the country, has been independently confirmed by any neutral source. All three remain live possibilities, specifically because Iran itself has done nothing to resolve the uncertainty, and in some cases appears to be actively deepening it. It is worth noting, too, that these explanations are not necessarily mutually exclusive. A leader could be genuinely wounded, genuinely in hiding for security reasons, and have significant portions of his day-to-day authority genuinely delegated to Revolutionary Guard officials, all at the same time, without any single explanation fully capturing the reality on the ground. Let's talk about the piece of this story that I think is the single most revealing detail in the entire situation, because it did not come from an anonymous intelligence leak or a foreign news outlet with an obvious stake in the narrative. It came from inside Iran's own government. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, the man who negotiates directly with the United States on Iran's behalf, has stated publicly that he personally has not yet met Mojtaba Khamenei in person, and that only a small number of people in the entire country have. Read that again. The chief diplomat of the Islamic Republic, the person literally sitting across the table from American officials in ceasefire and nuclear negotiations, cannot personally confirm what his own supreme leader looks like today, sounds like today, or is even physically capable of. If the country's own top diplomat is operating with that level of uncertainty about the man technically at the top of the entire chain of command, you have to ask what that means for every other decision being made inside the Iranian government right now, and on whose authority those decisions are actually being made. Now let's zoom out to why this matters strategically. Because a missing head of state in the middle of an active war is not just a curiosity. It is a structural problem for how that country actually functions in a conflict. Iran's constitution places enormous centralized authority in the office of Supreme Leader, control over the armed forces, the final word on major strategic decisions, oversight of the judiciary, and key state institutions. That system depends on the assumption that a single, identifiable person is actually exercising that authority, consulting with advisors, weighing intelligence, and making calls in real time as the war evolves. If the man holding that title has been physically absent, uncommunicative in any verifiable way, and possibly not even present in the country for nearly 5 months, the actual decision-making is necessarily happening somewhere else, whether that is a council of senior clerics, the IRGC's own command structure, or some improvised arrangement nobody outside a small circle fully understands. Analysts covering this exact situation have pointed out that his continued absence may reflect a genuinely different, more limited function for the role of Supreme Leader going forward compared to his father's nearly 4-decade, all-powerful tenure, a shift in the actual balance of power inside the regime rather than a temporary security measure. It helps to remember just how unusual this kind of extended, unexplained absence is for the specific office in question. Iran's system of clerical rule was built explicitly around the idea of a single, visible, unifying religious and political authority, someone the population could see, hear, and rally around during moments of national crisis, which is precisely what wartime represents. Ali Khamenei, whatever else can be said about his nearly 4-decade rule, understood that visibility as central to the legitimacy of the office itself, which is exactly why even he, at his lowest and most cautious moment during an earlier, shorter conflict, still eventually appeared in public rather than disappearing entirely. His son, inheriting the title without inheriting that same instinct or being unable to act on it, represents a genuine break from how the office has functioned since the Islamic Republic's founding, regardless of which of the 3 explanations turns out to be true. That uncertainty has consequences that reach directly into the war itself. Every negotiation the United States and its allies attempt to conduct with Iran now runs through officials who may or may not be operating with real authority from the top of their own chain of command. Every assumption American and Israeli planners make about how Iran will respond to a given strike, a given ultimatum, a given diplomatic overture, depends partly on understanding who is actually making decisions on the other side. If that answer is genuinely unclear, even to people inside the Iranian government itself, then every actor in this conflict is operating with a meaningfully higher level of uncertainty about the other side's decision-making than would normally exist in a war between identifiable state leaderships. That is not a minor footnote to this conflict. That is a variable that could be shaping the pace, tone, and outcome of negotiations happening right now. Think about what this means specifically for something like ceasefire diplomacy. American negotiators sitting across from Foreign Minister Araghchi are, by his own admission, negotiating with a man who cannot personally verify he is accurately representing his own Supreme Leader's current position, because he has never met him. Any agreement reached in those talks carries an additional layer of risk that does not exist in a normal negotiation between clearly empowered representatives. The risk that whoever is actually approving Iran's negotiating positions, whether that is Mojtaba himself through intermediaries, a council of clerics, or Revolutionary Guard leadership, could reverse or repudiate an agreement its own foreign minister helped negotiate, simply because the chain of authority behind that agreement was never as solid as it appeared from the outside. There's also a financial market angle to this that most people have completely missed, and it tells you something real about how seriously professional forecasters are taking this uncertainty. Prediction markets, tracking the probability of a confirmed public appearance by Mojtaba Khamenei, have shown declining odds over time, with the probability of him being seen in public by the end of this month recently sitting at just over 5%, down from roughly 14% only a week earlier. People putting real money behind their predictions are, on the whole, betting against him surfacing anytime soon, and that probability has been trending in one direction. That is not proof of anything specific about his condition or location, but it does tell you that informed, financially motivated observers see the pattern of continued absence as more likely to continue than to break, which is itself a meaningful signal layered on top of everything else in this story. It is worth understanding briefly why that kind of market signal carries real weight here, beyond simply being an interesting number. Prediction markets aggregate the judgment of people who have specifically chosen to put money on a single, narrow, falsifiable question. Will this man be seen in public by a specific date, rather than offering a vague opinion with no cost attached to being wrong? When that kind of market moves consistently in one direction over successive weeks, it reflects an accumulating body of participants updating their expectations downward as more time passes without any confirmed sighting. Exactly the pattern you would expect if the underlying situation, whatever it actually is, shows no sign of resolving on its own. Now, let's talk about the propaganda angle here too, because Iran's government has not been silent through any of this, even while its supreme leader has been invisible. Written statements released in Mojtaba Khamenei's name have continued to appear in state media throughout this period, asserting continuity, resolve, and control, the same rhetorical posture his father used throughout the war before his death. Whether those statements genuinely originate from him, are approved by him after being drafted by aides, or are produced entirely by other officials operating under his name, is exactly the unresolved question at the center of this entire story. A government that wanted to project weakness or leadership chaos to the outside world would not choose to keep issuing confident statements in an absent leader's name. The fact that Iran has chosen exactly that path, continuing to speak with apparent authority through a figure nobody can verify, is even making the decisions attributed to him, tells you the regime views managed uncertainty as preferable to publicly admitting a genuine leadership vacuum, whatever the true explanation for his absence actually is. There is a domestic angle to this strategy worth considering too. An Iranian public that has already endured months of war, strikes on its own infrastructure, and the assassination of a supreme leader who had held that position for nearly 4 decades, is a population primed to respond badly to any signal of leadership chaos at the very top. Continuing to issue statements in Mojtaba's name, regardless of who is actually authoring them, allows the regime to maintain at least a surface-level narrative of institutional continuity for its own citizens, even while foreign intelligence services and international journalists spend months failing to confirm even the most basic facts about the man those statements claim to represent. Whether that strategy actually succeeds in reassuring ordinary Iranians, or simply deepens the exact kind of quiet skepticism that has fueled endless speculation online, is itself an open question this war has not yet answered. Here's the hard truth, and I think this is the part that separates a serious breakdown from pure speculation dressed up as insight. Nobody outside a small circle inside Iran, and possibly nobody outside Iran at all, can currently say with confidence whether Mojtaba Khamenei is severely wounded, in hiding for legitimate security reasons, physically outside the country entirely, or in some condition that makes the entire question of his personal control largely irrelevant to how Iran is actually being governed day to day. Every one of the theories laid out in this video comes from credible reporting and credible sourcing, and every one of them remains fundamentally unconfirmed. Be skeptical of any content, including content on this exact topic, that presents one of these theories as settled fact. The honest answer, the one that should actually concern you most, is that the uncertainty itself has now persisted long enough, through a period that included his own father's funeral, that it can no longer be dismissed as a short-term security precaution. Something about this situation is genuinely unusual, even if we cannot yet say precisely what. Let's bring this down to what it means for the war moving forward. If Mojtaba Khamenei is severely incapacitated or largely absent from real decision-making, the practical center of gravity inside Iran's government may already have shifted toward the Revolutionary Guard's own senior command, an institution with its own institutional interests, its own appetite for continued confrontation, and historically a harder line than Iran's civilian diplomatic establishment. That matters enormously for how this conflict could evolve, because a war being steered primarily by a military and security apparatus, rather than a religious authority balancing competing factions the way Ali Khamenei did for decades, could plausibly produce a more escalatory, less negotiation-oriented posture than outside observers have been assuming. Every ceasefire discussion, every diplomatic overture from Washington, may currently be aimed, at least in part, at an authority structure that no longer functions the way it did before February. This is not a new pattern in how authoritarian and clerical systems handle a genuine leadership crisis during wartime. History offers no shortage of examples of a nominal head of state effectively sidelined, whether by injury, incapacity, or internal power struggles, while the military or security apparatus beneath him quietly absorbs the actual decision-making authority, all while public messaging continues to insist nothing has changed. What makes the Iranian case unusually visible is the sheer duration and the intensity of international scrutiny it is receiving in real time, with journalists, intelligence services, and financial markets all independently tracking the same absence and drawing broadly similar conclusions. Something about the normal function of this office has clearly changed, even if the precise mechanism remains contested. 2 things before you go, and I want you to actually do them. First, if this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of something most coverage has treated as a passing curiosity rather than a structural question about who is actually running this war, share it with someone trying to understand where this conflict is really headed. Second, I want your honest read in the comments. Which of the 3 explanations laid out in this video, injury, security-driven concealment, or an IRGC-managed facade with the real leader physically removed, do you find most credible based on everything you just heard? And do you think a government can continue functioning this way indefinitely, or is a moment of forced clarity, one way or another, coming for Iran's leadership sooner rather than later? I'm also curious whether you think Iran's own foreign minister, admitting he has never met his supreme leader, changes how seriously the rest of the world should be taking any agreement Iran signs onto right now. Drop your answer below. I rate every one of them, and if this delivered real value, hit like before you go. Here's where this leaves us. Nearly 5 months after being named Iran's supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei has never been confirmed on camera, never delivered a public address in his own voice, and was absent even from the funeral ceremonies for his own father, a fact that social media users and journalists alike scoured every available image, trying and failing to disprove. His own foreign minister admits he has not personally met him. Israeli and Western intelligence assessments range from serious war wounds to complete physical absence from the country to a Revolutionary Guard-managed information operation using his name, while the real decisions happen elsewhere. Prediction markets are increasingly betting against him surfacing anytime soon. None of these theories has been independently confirmed, and any account that tells you otherwise with total certainty is guessing. What is confirmed is this: the man holding the single most powerful title in Iran has been functionally invisible through the most consequential months in his country's modern history. And that vacuum, whatever is actually causing it, may be shaping decisions inside this war that nobody outside a very small circle in Tehran fully understands. A war being negotiated, fought, and potentially ended without a clearly identifiable, verifiable authority at the top of one side's chain of command is not a footnote. It is one of the defining, underreported facts of this entire conflict, and it will remain one until the day, if it ever comes, that Mojtaba Khamenei actually steps in front of a camera and answers, in his own voice, the question the entire world has been asking for nearly 5 months. Keep watching this one closely, because the moment that changes, one way or another, will tell us more about where this war is truly headed than almost anything else happening in this conflict right now.